All right, Derek, a lot of us are really worried about the oncoming, just sort of the technocratic state, the technocracy, the surveillance, the CBDCs, the 15-minute cities. Um, you wrote a book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. I talk a lot about it in the warning sense, but what the hell can we do is a whole different part of the topic. First of all, paint the picture for us right now. Like, you've been researching this for a long time. How I don't know how to phrase this in a way, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we? Like if 10 is the end and they have full control and they've now, gotten to us, or on a scale of like 1 to 100%, like where do you think we are today versus where we were
Hmm.
5 years ago or even 10 years ago? Does that make sense? Are we getting better? Are we
Yeah.
getting worse? Are they getting more
Um,
control?
I think they are definitely advancing their agendas. I'll say that. As far as like let's say like what they are doing, all these different forces and people who would prefer the Klaus Schwabs of the world and
Right.
those folks. I would say as far as their agenda advancing, we're probably at a 6 or 7 if 10 is complete control everything. Not to say that everything has gone their way, of course, but I mean look around. A lot of the agendas are becoming pretty mainstream after COVID. Vaccine passports quickly morphed into a discussion on digital IDs. We're seeing the explosion of digital identity programs in parts of Africa. Of course, discussion of central bank digital currencies and other forms of government controlled programmable money. These are all agendas that have been promoted by Klaus Schwab since at least his Fourth Industrial Revolution book, and even longer for some other players. So I would say their agenda is advancing, but I also like to think that the people's agenda is also advancing. That is what my book focuses on: how to opt out of the technocratic state. I want to let everybody know they can download it for free at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. You can purchase it and listen to the audiobook, of course, everywhere else. But if you want to just check it out, PDF version. I wrote this book at the end of 2019 and published it January 30th, 2020, right before COVID happened. And
Right before it got really bad, and then they really wanted to come after us with all the
yeah,
technocracy, right?
I mean, a lot of the stuff I was writing about, it happened 6 months after I published the book. So it was kind of like, okay, but I didn't, predict COVID or that it was going to come in the form of a pandemic. But I knew that
Right.
these agendas were progressing. And the reason I was writing the book is because a lot of my journalism, especially back in Houston, has centered around digital rights and privacy and surveillance. Because in 2013, I was leaked some images from a Houston Police Department officer who was showing me that I was under surveillance for some of my activism. And that essentially just kind of began a journey diving down the rabbit hole, trying to understand what is surveillance technology, what tools are that: Stingray cell phone surveillance technology, heat detection technology, gate detection, facial recognition, all these different things. And so I've been following these technologies and writing articles about it for years, and writing about warnings from people who are much more knowledgeable than me, lawyers and digital rights attorneys, warning as far back as 2017, saying facial recognition is advancing pretty quickly. We should probably think about what's coming next. The fact that, for example, Illinois is the only U.S. state that has any sort of facial recognition protection for your face print, as it's known, which allowed companies like Clearview and others to step in this space, of course, the government as well, and develop these massive databases of all of our face prints as we've been taking selfies for a decade plus now and giving them info. And so I was writing the book kind of partly as a warning of, guys, if you haven't noticed, there's some scary things kind of on the horizon, and also as a guide, or sort of offering some ideas and tips that I personally use in my life. I haven't had a bank account since 2008.
Wow.
I try to stay out of certain systems. I don't use a phone. My partner, she uses a privacy phone. My buddy has a company who does de-Googled privacy phones. So I try very much to stay out of their systems, and other ways that I will keep off the record for now, as much as possible. Because not only because I think that it's what aligns with my principles, because I don't want to feed the war machine. I don't want to feed and support these companies. But I think that's also going to become necessary as they're building this increasingly entrenched, interconnected, digital dystopic world where, without a digital ID, without a government wallet that has all of your money and knows everything you're doing, then you won't be able to operate in these mainstream systems. And so I was kind of just asking the question and encouraging our movement, if you will, or people who are thinking about these things, like, well, what comes next? We understand that there's all these bad things coming on. We hear about Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, stuff like that. But what are we doing on our side to make sure that we can continue to stay free and thrive? How do you maintain liberty and privacy in a world that is increasingly throwing those things out the window. And that's kind of what the book was trying to ask, as well as provide some answers and some solutions to. And so I published that in 2020, and then I republished it late 2022 with the second edition, which has 5 new post-COVID chapters based on everything that we learned during COVID. Because lockdowns, travel restrictions. When I came to Mexico early in COVID, part of it was building this network of people who are trying to get out of Germany, Australia, Canada, and some of the really bad places, coming to Mexico, because Mexico ended up being one of only 2 nations that had no shots, no quarantines, no things like that. And
Right.
so we
What
started
was
to
the other
see,
one?
I think it was Nicaragua for a little while. I don't know if
Oh,
they ended up
okay.
holding out, but Mexico stayed all the way that way. And that doesn't mean every part of the country was, completely free. Different. It was kind of decentralized, like the U.S. Some states were a little more forceful about it, others were
Yeah.
not. But on a whole, there was no quarantine for foreigners. There was no lockdown, no shutdown, and so a lot of those lessons learned went into the second edition of the book, because as I say in the book, that I do believe we will see climate lockdowns or another pandemic, or I think essentially that these people, what I call the predator class, have shown their hands. I think that they've shown us the tools that they're willing to use: coercion, firing you, the travel restrictions, all these sort of things that we saw, and that we would be wise to not just kind of sit back and continue on and forget about it until the next time it happens, but perhaps think about the way we're living our lives and the way we interact with digital technology, especially the explosion of AI and video audio fakery, and how are we going to interact with that, and where's that red line for us? Like, are you willing to submit
Right.
to facial recognition so you can continue to fly? Are you willing to accept the digital ID because you got to keep working your job? And I think COVID was just a preview of that. And we saw some people were willing to move across the country or move states or move across the world if it meant staying free with their family. And I witnessed this. I met many people who literally had sold everything they owned and got out of Germany or Australia because they were locked down in true tyranny, and came to Mexico just with a hope that maybe something would work out for their family. So I tried to take that knowledge and really turn it into this book here.
Well, I'm glad you updated the book because before COVID, certainly things were very different. And after COVID, I think that a lot of people open up their eyes. But, and I think that you're right in saying that they've advanced themselves, but so have people, right? Because we have become much more aware about this. And so we have caught on to a lot of their antics, like the debanking and the censorship on social media. We do have people that are fighting back on it. What do you think the chances? I mean, what you're doing is, I think, extreme, and I don't think most of us can like debank ourselves or not use phones or not, all the things that you're doing. I think most of us need to have, connection, right, to to these things. Um, and so the one thing that I could think of, like just even here, Rumble, just trying to build alternatives and say, we're not going to put up with this. And so we're going to build an alternative. And then you just have to hope that the alternative stays strong and doesn't get sucked in or bought out or,
Absolutely. I mean, so that is the message of the book. In the book, I talk about, so it's broken down in different parts. The first part is a little bit of history for those who don't know what technocracy and the sort of history of that movement and what it meant, which is essentially what we saw during COVID. Trust the experts, the people at the top, the technicians, the experts, the scientists. They're going to run things and they're going to micromanage our lives, and they promise it'll be a utopia. And I essentially argue in the book that even though this philosophy, we're told, sort of fell into the dustbin of history, that I think it's actually been the guiding force, and it is the guiding force for people like Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab and others, that they believe that they are above and beyond governments or the people's desires and business, et cetera, and they want to set the agenda. They claim in the name of a better humanity. And so I provide some of that history, and then I discuss what I believe is the answer, which is the philosophy known as agorism or counter economics, which is essentially what you were just talking about. I kind of coined my own term. I call it exit and build. And this is like the idea of exiting from slavery systems. This could be if you do choose to unbank yourself, debank yourself, and then maybe you go from being at, for example, JP Morgan Chase to a local credit union. That's a step in the
right,
right direction. And in the book, I kind of provide these steps of, here's maybe your big picture. I'd like to have land and growing my own food and not be dependent on the grocery store. But maybe that's not where you're at right
right.
now. So, visiting the farmers market every weekend and supporting local farmers is a step in that right direction, right? So it's all about taking those concrete steps. You don't have to throw away your phone tomorrow, but you could choose to stop using Google as a search engine right now. You could choose to go to privacytools.io or nomoregoogle.com and look up alternatives to everything that you're doing right now that Google does. There's already alternative companies that exist. And just like with Rumble, a lot of these alternatives you're not going to hear about unless you go search them out. And they need our support. You know, they're not going to be able to sustain themselves and last if they don't have a customer base. And so that's really kind of the message is where can we see the systems that they're trying to build and recognize, okay, staying in that system is not conducive to liberty, to privacy in the long term for me or my family. I need to rethink
Right.
that. So if I want to avoid the CBDCs, how can I start moving some of my money into, you know, a local credit union or whatever alternatives, a lot of people into silver and gold and precious metals, stuff like that. I'm not here to give financial advice, but
Right.
the idea being that you are seeing what's coming. Instead of just sitting there like a deer in headlights, you actually start taking some concrete steps to build something new. And we're not all going to be the ones building the infrastructure. You didn't build Rumble, I didn't build
Right.
Rumble, but other people come along and they embrace it. They support alternatives and things like that. And so that's kind of the idea is how can we exit from these slavery systems that we clearly see are being erected in front of us and, you know, for us, around us. How do we start to exit from those systems and build and or support those who are building new ones? And that's really what a lot of my work focuses on. How do we build parallel systems? That's like the work that I promote in the book and through the Freedom Cell Network and some of my other projects is very much about trying to get people using the journalism to educate people, get them to realize there's some scary things going on, but at the same time trying to have a deeper philosophical discussion about how we're going to connect and interface with this technology. And we're all going to have different red lines, of course, like maybe some things you'll be willing to put up with that I won't, and vice versa. And it's just up to us to have that conversation because if we don't even think about it, we are going to sleepwalk right into their
Right.
world because they're moving their agendas forward. We should probably be putting some thought and energy into thinking about what is our 2030 going to look like. And for me, I want privacy, I want bodily autonomy, I want to be around other free people, I want clean food, clean water, and you know, I've got some land, I'm homesteading and stuff like that. But whatever your ideal is, you should probably start thinking about putting energy into that because that is not what they have in
Right.
mind for you.